Hello, and welcome to Art Answers from Donna Downey Studios. My name is Stephen Lursen, and I'm happy you're back. Let me go ahead and get started. So the first question for this week is from Robert Hamill. He said, another week, another question, here goes. Is there a simple explanation to using a color wheel to help avoid making mud? And that is an excellent question. Let me get the color wheel. This is a color wheel that Donna Downey made. You see the three primary colors are yellow, blue, and red. They're called primary because out of all of the colors in the painting spectrum, if you don't have those, you can't mix any other colors to create those. So then the mixture of primaries are the secondary colors, which are orange, violet, or purple, and green. Now here is where this becomes really relevant. So whenever you have a bright jewel tone color, let's say you have a neon or emerald green, and you want an army green, you want a natural landscape green, all you do is add a touch of its complement. Suddenly, you take that intense, bright, vivid green and bring it down. That's called muting a color. So you said, how do you keep from making it mud? Well, if you take any complements and put too many complements together, or in too great of a percentage, then it's going to become mud. Doesn't matter if it's blue and orange, purple and yellow, or red and green. Mixing those in great amounts together will become mud. You can use that anytime you want to adjust a color, but don't abuse it and then regret by painting and by having mud. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking. And we also had someone named Kathleen O'Neill reply to that. Thank you so much for your reply. Excellent information. Okay, so the next question is from Kim T. She said, I would love to know more about brushes for mixed media and art journaling. In particular, which are the best to buy? How do you clean them? And is it okay to use one brush for both paint and decoupage? It goes on, but I'm going to stop right there just because there's so many compound questions. You have the option between a firm brush and a floppy limp brush. Go with the firm brush. How do you clean them? There is actual artist soap that we sell for cleaning paint out of brushes, and then you would wash them with soap and water. Is it okay to use one brush for both paint and decoupage? So it is acrylic polymer without any pigment, so you can use it with paint and with matte medium, or which is heavy well, I'm overgeneralizing, but if you use decoupage, you can use that brush with other things. Just don't let it ever dry out. Always put it in the water whenever you're not using it and wash it clean whenever you're finished using it. There are a number of brush cleaners that may be healthier than the traditional way of soaking them in kerosene, which I don't recommend. So basically, it's best to prevent having your brushes dry hard. When that happens, we just generally have to throw them away because it takes so much work to restore them. But it is possible, and there are products that are sold that are designed to restore brushes and clean them. Let's move on. So Heidi said, Hi Stephen, I would like to know the best way to seal a watercolor. Is it dependent upon the surface used? First and foremost, watercolor paintings traditionally have to be framed behind glass because it is never permanent. If you take a 100-year-old watercolor on watercolor paper or anything, you spray it down with water, it's going to reactivate that pigment, it's going to run. So behind glass is officially the best way to seal it. And then later you said, is it dependent upon the surface used, whether it's canvas, watercolor paper, aquaboard, etc.? The watercolor is sitting on top, or in watercolor paper, it has been absorbed in, but it is never a permanent waterproof pigment, unlike acrylic or oil. So it always has to be shielded by either a varnish of some sort, which is less secure, or frame behind glass, which is the most secure. And you can't really do watercolor successfully with its intended purpose on primed canvas because the intrinsic desire built into watercolor is that it needs to be absorbed into the fibers of watercolor paper or any other substrate. Otherwise, it's just kind of sitting on top and it can easily be wiped or washed off. So we'll move on. Mel said, "Hi Stephen, what can I use to protect my finished mixed media collages against sun, dust, and so on?" Those are very separate issues. So to protect something against sun, if you have a piece of artwork that is in a sunroom or a kitchen or a very bright room that does get direct sunlight from outside through a window, or for that matter, a painting on something that's outside, you need to, if possible, shield it behind a UV glass. That's probably the most expensive way. Or you could spray varnish it with something that specifically says UV blocker or UV protection. Otherwise, if it's hung in a place that never gets direct sunlight, like in the middle of a living room wall or something like that, that doesn't ever have the sun shining on it, you don't really have to worry so much about the UV doing real strong damage. Dust, the way that you protect a mixed media collage against dust, if it's really 3D, high relief, it has objects coming off of the canvas or panel, it may require actual dusting because it is like a shelf. It's sticking out and the dust falls onto it. If it is very two-dimensional and flat with minimal texture, then as long as it's sealed with acrylic medium, whether that's gloss or matte is irrelevant, as long as it's sealed, the final layer is sealed with an acrylic gel, then you could always just wipe it off with a damp towel. As time passes, you could dust it like anything else. You wouldn't want to use chemicals that could break down the acrylic. What if I use both acrylics and watercolors in my works? So if you have watercolors sitting on top and it's not sealed, then you can't really wash it or wipe it because you would wash and wipe off the watercolor itself. So in that case, protecting it behind glass or framing it or something like that is absolutely the best way to protect it for years. Adding watercolor or gelatos or something like that that is not permanent to the last layer of a work of art, adds a lot of interest. It's a wonderful thing for art, but it also adds a problem for archival protection, keeping it the same through years. So that's just something to consider. But they're a lot of fun, so I use them myself. Courtney Miley, she said, "Hi Stephen, my question is similar to those above pertaining to preserving my art in my art journal. What can be used for the pages so they will not stick together?" Great question. That is a normal thing to happen whenever you have acrylic and acrylic sticking together, especially when they're not 100% thoroughly dried all the way through, then they will want to adhere at some level. Donna has used one product specifically, Dorland's wax medium, which we do sell here, that not only gives it a nice seal, but it also keeps it from sticking. So that would just be buffed onto the surface. As long as you're not buffing it onto a pastel or a very fragile surface. If you have something where if you rubbed it, it would change the art, you're not going to be able to buff it on. You'll have to figure out a different way to apply it more gently. Other than Dorland's wax medium, you can also use baby powder sprinkled. The downside to baby powder, if you use too much, is that it kind of gives a haze over your art. So you just then have to like dust it off. It's almost like dusting your work so that you can dust it off. But it does; these do keep them from sticking. Sweet Red Clover. This is the third time that this person has asked a question, and I did respond via comment on the blog, but I do need to acknowledge you on video. You said, "Hi, I'm still wondering if you could share any insights on making wearable art, such as T-shirts and handbags. They would get a fair amount of use. Thanks." I unfortunately have no experience with creating art on clothing or merchandise items like handbags or towels or anything that's going to be washed and dried and washed and dried and washed and dried. So unfortunately, I'm very sorry. I actually don't know, but I'll keep my ears open, and if I ever hear about something that can make a very permanent, washable, wearable, durable art so that you can paint something, as opposed to a screen print, which is generally what is used. But as far as painting on objects and selling them for wearable, I don't know apart from the fabric medium, which if you have used that before and are not satisfied, then that's a great question. I'm going to move on since I don't know. Susan Gottschalk said, what, if any, is the best additive to make a heavy body acrylic behave more like fluid acrylic? It goes on. I'm going to answer that. So if you want to thin down a heavy body acrylic, the simplest way is with water. However, that can make it too runny. So there are fluid mediums, just clear fluid matte medium or fluid gloss medium. They are the fluid acrylic polymer without any pigment. You mix that together and it's going to make it more fluid. In that way, it will behave differently. Another thing you could use would be glazing medium. But I would say the first thing you would try is, or use, it would be the fluid acrylic medium. We do have that in the studio. I'll be right back. And here we are. We have fluid matte medium. You want to make sure it says fluid on there so that you know that it is going to cause other paints that aren't fluid to behave more like a fluid medium. Win Din said, do you have a suggestion for a white surface for the scratch technique utilizing color over top rather than black? Can't seem to find a surface that will work the way I'd hoped. So I guess you have a suggestion for a white surface for the scratch technique. Now, I may not be understanding it, but there is a technique in acrylic painting called sgraffito, which is when you have a wet paint surface and then you scratch through it, which reveals whatever was underneath. That's called sgraffito. If you are referring to like whenever you have colored crayon sheets and then you cover it over with black and you scratch through it to reveal the colors underneath, that's a similar thing, except the acrylic, once it's dry, you're not going to be able to scratch it off like crayons. But if you're asking for the surface that is strong against scratching, then I would say wooden panels, artist panels. I like to get the cradled kind because they are more substantial and they're deeper, just like an artist canvas. That means that they're about that deep instead of just a thin piece of plywood. Or you could get a canvas panel. I'm not a huge fan of the canvas panels because you have to frame them to hang them. But the benefit is that it is a firm canvas surface instead of a flexible canvas surface, which you get with a stretched canvas. So we might as well, we're here at the end, might as well go all the way. CM Hawkins said, hello Stephen, I am becoming a fan of your Q&A videos. Well, thank you. I think you do a great job. My question, how and when do you use absorbent ground white? So from my experience, the only time I've ever used an absorbent ground was whenever I was wanting to put something on top of it that was designed to be absorbed, such as watercolor or any watercolor similar items, such as gelatos, watercolor aquarellable pencils, possibly pastels. So things that you want to be absorbed into the surface so that it lasts a little longer, like traditional watercolor arts, that's when you would use the absorbent ground. There are probably numerous more ways that you can use it. That's just the only way I've ever used it. So that brings us to the end of the list. Thank you very much for watching. And the demonstration video is going to be one that I made a little while ago, and it's called, I call it the Expressive Portrait, and it's a lot of fun. We're actually teaching this class in the studio twice next month, one on the kids level and one for the adults, which I'm really excited about. And I've had a number of people come into the studio asking about it. So it's more of a refresher and really fun. You can try it at home, try it anywhere. And I hope you enjoy that, and we'll see you in, I hope you enjoy that, but I'm going to be gone next week. I'll be a camp counselor to camp, and then the following week for my summer vacation. Yay! So I won't be back the next 2 weeks. I'll be back on the 3 weeks from now, every week after that. So I hope you have a wonderful couple weeks, and as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, I'll be back. Thank you. See you soon.